We're about to dive deep into one of the biggest intellectual battles in Western history, the epic struggle between faith and reason. And it's a conflict that was set ablaze in 18th century Germany by a powerful movement that would change, well, pretty much everything, the Aufklärung.
At its heart is a question that, let's be honest, we still wrestle with today. Are faith and reason total opposites? Do we really have to choose one over the other? We're going to unpack how that very question was forged in the fire of a revolution in thought. Okay, here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage in a world totally dominated by faith. Then, we'll watch the intellectual earthquake of the Aufklärung hit. We'll see how reason put the story of Jesus himself under a microscope, check out a modern attempt to build a bridge by Joseph Ratzinger, and finally, ask if faith and reason can actually work together.
To really get why this was such an explosion, you first have to understand the world it completely shattered. So, let's step back in time to the pre-Enlightenment medieval order, a world forged in faith.
Imagine a world of almost total certainty. You were born into a specific social slot, a peasant, a craftsman, a knight, and that wasn't just your job, it was who you were. Your identity wasn't something you chose, it was just handed to you at birth. And here's the crucial part. There was almost no personal autonomy. Your entire life was just one thread woven into this giant, unchanging tapestry of hierarchies and institutions, all believed to be part of a divine plan. The church's authority was absolute. It literally defined reality itself.
But then, an intellectual earthquake began to shake the very foundations of this world. And this was the German Enlightenment, or as they called it, the Aufklärung.
So, what was the Aufklärung? Basically, it was this movement that championed human reason as the #1 source of authority. It encouraged people to think for themselves, to question everything, whether it was the government or the church.
And this wasn't some cold, boring academic exercise. No way. The philosopher Ernst Cassirer totally nailed its passionate energy, calling it a genuine lust for knowledge, a powerful, burning desire to understand the world through pure intellect, with no censorship, no dogma.
Now, it's really important to draw a line between the German Aufklärung and its more famous French cousin. You see, while the French Enlightenment was often super anti-religious, the German thinkers took a totally different approach. They didn't want to burn Christianity to the ground. They wanted to engage with it, to reform it from the inside, and to make its core ideas stand up to rational scrutiny.
And this, right here, leads us straight to the heart of the conflict. The thinkers of the Aufklärung turned their powerful new tools of analysis onto the very foundations of the Christian faith itself.
Their weapon of choice was historical criticism. For the very first time, scholars dared to look at the Bible not as some perfect, divinely dictated text, but as a human historical document, one you could analyze just like any other piece of ancient writing. And that, of course, raises a huge question. What happens when you strip away centuries of theology and just look at the Gospels with the cold, hard eye of a historian? Well, the results were explosive. What happened was this dramatic split. On one side, you have the traditional Christ of faith, the divine Son of God from the church creeds. But on the other, the Aufklärung's analysis gave us the historical Jesus. And he looked very, very different. A human moral teacher, a Jewish prophet whose main goal wasn't saving souls, but a political one.
Thinkers like Hermann Reimarus argued that Jesus was actually a failed Messiah. He pointed to Jesus' famous last words on the cross as proof. Reimarus said, hey, this isn't the cry of a divine being making a sacrifice. This is the cry of a man realizing his political mission on earth had completely failed. In this view, the resurrection was just a story his disciples made up to salvage something from the tragedy. This challenge from the Aufklärung has been echoing for centuries. So now, let's fast forward to the 20th century, where we find a major theologian, Joseph Ratzinger, who you might know as Pope Benedict XVI, tackling this intellectual legacy head-on. So get this, nearly 200 years after the Aufklärung, this huge divide was still there. Then, in 1959, Ratzinger steps up to the plate to address this long-standing divorce between the God of faith and the God of the philosophers. So how did he try to build this bridge? Well, Ratzinger looked back to the great medieval thinker Thomas Aquinas. He argued that reason can absolutely take the first step.
Philosophy, he said, can logically figure out that some kind of supreme being must exist, but reason can only get you so far. Faith has to take the second step, revealing who this God is, not just some abstract first cause, but a personal God of love. This whole idea is just perfectly summed up by this classic line from Aquinas: "Grace does not destroy, but perfects nature." For Ratzinger, this is everything. It means faith doesn't cancel out reason. Instead, it builds on it, it heals it, and it lifts it up to truths it could never, ever reach on its own. And that brings us to a really powerful modern synthesis, a way of looking at this entire centuries-long debate through one single, really compelling metaphor.
Ratzinger completely embraced this powerful image from Pope John Paul II. It's beautiful, right? Faith and reason aren't enemies locked in a cage match. They're like two wings on the same bird, and you absolutely need both of them to fly toward the truth.
So if there's one big takeaway from this huge historical debate, it's a proposal for a partnership. The goal isn't to force a choice between a faith that has to ignore science or a reason that just dismisses mystery. It's about seeing that both are essential parts of our human search for truth and for meaning.
Which leaves us with a question for our own time, for right now. In our world, a world of incredible scientific discovery that still, hungers for meaning, where do you see these two wings, faith and reason, working together? And where do you still see them at odds? It's a debate the AF clone kicked off, and it's one we are all still living in.